The shackles were cold, but the silence of the crowd was colder. Clementine Hartmore stood on the velvet dais, the wood rough beneath her bare, bruised feet. 1,000 eyes watched from the shadows of the opera boxes, gleaming like predators in the dark. She was the final lot of the night, the broken thing, the rejected Omega with no pack and no scent of sweetness, only the metallic tang of fear. Snow drifted through a crack in the high dome above, melting against her feverish skin. She didn't pray for rescue. In this world of teeth and claws, rescue was just a prettier word for capture. She only prayed for an end. The auctioneer, Verena Stoneheart, prowled the stage like a panther in silk. Her voice, amplified by the acoustics of the gilded cage, was a purr that scraped against Clementine's nerves. And finally, Verena crooned, gesturing to Clementine with a fan made of peacock feathers. The runt of the Hartmore line. No heat sent to drive you mad, gentlemen. No dowry of land or gold. Just flesh. Resilient, perhaps. Quiet, certainly. A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. It was a low, ugly sound, the sound of powerful men amused by weakness. Clementine kept her chin lifted, though her knees trembled. She focused on a single dust mote dancing in the spotlight, refusing to meet the gazes of the alphas in the front row. They smelled of cigar smoke, brandy, and aggression. "Do I hear 500 gold coins?" Verena asked, her lip curling in a sneer. Silence. 300? Verena sighed, tapping her fan against her palm. Come now, she can scrub floors if nothing else. 200? A heavy, suffocating awkwardness settled over the room. To be auctioned was humiliating. To be unwanted at an auction was a death sentence. Unsold Omegas were cast out into the barrens where the rogues waited. Clementine felt the first tear track hot and humiliated down her cheek. 100, Verena said, her voice flat. Or to the wolves she goes. 50, a drunk voice shouted from the back, followed by a belch. I need someone to feed my hounds. Clementine closed her eyes. So this is it. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall groaned. They didn't just open, they were forced apart by a pressure that changed the air pressure in the room. The candles closest to the entrance flickered and died. A gust of wind, carrying the scent of ancient pine, crushed snow and ozone, swept through the gilded cage. Every alpha in the room stiffened. The drunkard who had bid 50 coins whimpered and slid down in his seat. A figure emerged from the shadows of the vestibule. He was immense, his shoulders spanning the width of the aisle. He wore a heavy coat of black wool trimmed with silver fur, damp with the storm raging outside. His boots thudded against the floorboards with a rhythm that sounded like a war drum. Verena Stoneheart faltered, her fan lowering slowly. My lord?" The stranger stopped at the edge of the light. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and brutal beauty, eyes the color of a frozen lake, pale, piercing blue. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, not marring his face, but marking it dangerous. 1 million, the stranger said. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated in Clementine's chest, vibrating against her ribs. The room gasped as one. 1 million gold coins could buy a kingdom, not a broken Omega. Verena blinked, her composure cracking. I beg your pardon? 1 million, the man repeated, stepping into the light. The air around him seemed to shimmer with a terrifying leashed power. And the girl leaves with me. Now. Sold, Verena shrieked, slamming her gavel down so hard the handle cracked. Sold to King Leopold Thorncrest of the Northern Reach. Clementine's breath hitched. Thorncrest, the Alpha King, the ruler of the ice wastes, a shifter who was said to have a heart of glacier ice and a beast that had killed 100 men. He didn't look at the crowd. He walked straight to the dais, effortlessly vaulted onto the stage, and stopped in front of her. Up close, the sheer heat radiating from him was dizzying. He smelled of winter, but a winter that burned. He reached out. Clementine flinched, bracing for a blow. Leopold paused. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. Slowly, deliberately, he unclasped the heavy cloak from his shoulders and draped it around her. It swallowed her small frame, heavy and warm, smelling of him. Can you walk? He asked, his voice rough like gravel under boots. Clementine nodded mutely, though she wasn't sure she could. Good, he rumbled. He turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the cowering alphas. If anyone speaks of her with disrespect, he announced, I will hunt you down. He placed a hand on the small of her back, not grabbing, just guiding, and led her out of the hell. The carriage was a fortress on wheels, upholstered in midnight blue velvet and reinforced with iron. Outside, the storm that had heralded Leopold's arrival had turned into a blizzard. The wind howled like a dying thing, clawing at the windows, but inside, it was silent. Clementine sat on the edge of the seat, clutching the king's cloak around her throat. She stared at the man sitting opposite her. Leopold had his eyes closed, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He looked like a statue carved from granite, utterly still, yet she could see the slow rhythmic rise and fall of his breath. Why? The question spun in her mind until she felt dizzy. Why pay a fortune for a rejected Omega? Was he planning to eat her? Sacrifice her? The stories of the Northern Reach were filled with blood magic and savage rites. "Stop thinking so loud," Leopold said without opening his eyes. "You'll give yourself a headache." Clementine jumped, pressing herself harder into the corner. I apologize, Your Majesty." One blue eye cracked open. It focused on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "And stop shaking. I haven't eaten anyone in days." Was that a joke? Clementine blinked. "I'm cold, my lord." He sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of a deep well. He reached under the seat and pulled out a thick woolen blanket, tossing it onto her lap. "Put that over your legs. The heater utilizes firestones, but the North respects no magic but its own." "Thank you," she whispered, tucking the wool around her frozen feet. "What is your name?" he asked, fully opening his eyes now. Clementine Hartmore." Hartmore. He tasted the name, frowning. The Southern Pack. They breed soft wolves, farmers, poets. "I am neither," she said, a sudden spark of defiance igniting in her chest. "I am nothing. That is why they sold me." Leopold leaned forward. The movement was predatory, yet his expression remained unreadable. "Nothing has a value, Clementine. Sometimes the empty cup holds the most wine." "Or it is simply empty," she countered, then bit her lip, terrified she had spoken out of turn. Leopold studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching taut. Then, surprisingly, the corner of his mouth ticked up. "You have a spine, little wolf. Good. You will need it where we are going." "Where are we going?" "Home," he said, and the word sounded like a sentence. "The Obsidian Citadel. It sits on the edge of the world." As the hours blurred into night, Clementine's exhaustion overtook her fear. The rhythmic swaying of the carriage and the warmth of the cloak lulled her. Her head bobbed, heavy with sleep. She woke with a start when the carriage hit a rut. She was falling forward, but she didn't hit the floor. A large, calloused hand had caught her shoulder. She looked up, disoriented, to find herself halfway across the carriage, Leopold leaning in to steady her. "Sleep," he commanded softly. "I can't," she murmured, eyes drooping. "The nightmares—" "There are no nightmares here," Leopold said, his voice dropping to a subsonic rumble that vibrated in her bones, a command of alpha authority that bypassed her conscious mind and soothed her instincts. "I am the nightmare, and I am on your side." It was a terrifying comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. Clementine slumped back, darkness claiming her before she could analyze the strangeness of his touch. The world was white. When Clementine stepped out of the carriage days later, the brightness of the snow blinded her. The air was thin and sharp, tasting of ozone. As her eyes adjusted, she saw it. The Obsidian Citadel rose from the side of a jagged mountain like a black shard of glass. It was impossibly tall, its spires piercing the low-hanging gray clouds. It didn't look built. It looked grown, a natural formation of dark, unforgiving rock. "Breathe," Leopold said, standing beside her. "The altitude takes some getting used to." They stood in a massive courtyard paved with black stone. Dozens of wolves, huge, shaggy beasts in shades of gray, white, and timber, stopped their training to watch. They shifted, bones cracking and reshaping, until a small army of men and women stood naked or half-clothed in the snow, bowing their heads. "My king," a voice rang out. A man approached them. He was lean and wiry, with hair the color of dried wheat and a face that looked like it smiled often, though his eyes were sharp and calculating. This was Elijah Stormhaven, the Beta of the North. "Elijah," Leopold greeted him with a nod. Is the border secure? As secure as ice can be, Elijah said, his gaze sliding immediately to Clementine. His eyebrows shot up. And this is the cargo? This is Clementine, Leopold corrected, his tone warning. She is not cargo. Elijah's expression shifted from amusement to curiosity. My apologies. Welcome to the freezer, my lady. Clementine hugged the cloak tighter. Thank you. Take her to the east wing, Leopold instructed, looking away toward the fortress. The suite with the hearth. See that she is fed and clothed. The east wing? Elijah whispered, shocked. Leo, that's right next to your— Do it, Leopold growled, turning his back on them. I have council matters to attend to. Without another word, the king strode away, the wolves parting like the Red Sea before him. Clementine watched him go, feeling a sudden, irrational pang of abandonment. He was terrifying, yes, but he was the only thing she knew in this frozen wasteland. Well, Elijah said, clapping his hands, come along, Clementine. Let's get you thawed out before you turn into an ice sculpture. It brings down the property value. He led her through the massive iron doors. The interior of the citadel was surprisingly beautiful. High vaulted ceilings carved with intricate patterns of wolves and moons, lit by floating orbs of pale magical fire. But it was empty, vast, echoing, and lonely. Why did he buy me? Clementine asked as they climbed a spiraling staircase of black marble. Elijah glanced back, his smile fading slightly. Leopold does many things that make no sense to the common mind, but he rarely does anything without a reason. Is he cruel? Elijah stopped on the landing. Cruel? No? Hard? Yes. The North requires hardness. If you are soft here, you die. Leopold is the hardest of us all because he has to be. He looked at her, his eyes softening. But he brought you here, to the heart of his power. That means you are under his protection, and there is no safer place in the world than behind Leopold Thorncrest. They reached a set of double doors made of white weirwood. Elijah pushed them open. Clementine gasped. The room was magnificent. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. Thick furs covered the floor. A four-poster bed sat in the center, draped in heavy silks of silver and blue. And one entire wall was glass, overlooking the jagged peaks and the endless white drop below. Rest, Elijah said. Dinner will be sent up. Don't wander the halls at night. The castle remembers things. With that cryptic warning, he left, closing the door with a soft click. Clementine stood alone in the center of the luxury. She walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. Far below, she saw a lone figure walking the ramparts, dark against the snow. Leopold. He stopped, tilting his head back as if he knew she was watching. Even from this distance, she felt the weight of his gaze. She wasn't a prisoner in a dungeon. She was a bird in a gilded cage of ice, and for the first time in her life, looking down at the monster who had purchased her, she wondered if the cage was meant to keep her in or to keep the rest of the world out. The silence of the obsidian citadel was not empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums like deep water. For the first week, Clementine existed in a suspended state of luxury and isolation. Her world shrank to the confines of the East Wing suite, a cage of velvet and weirwood. She spent hours tracing the frost patterns on the floor-to-ceiling glass, watching the northern lights bleed green and violent violet across the sky. The servants were invisible shadows who left trays of rich venison stew, dark rye bread, and tart lingonberry wine, then vanished before she could ask a question. She was fed, clothed, and warmed, yet she felt more like a ghost than she ever had on the auction block. On the seventh day, the silence broke. The heavy oak door groaned open, not for a silent maid, but for a woman who brought the scent of dried sage and old parchment with her. She was ancient, her skin a map of deep lines, her hair a thick braid of iron gray that reached her waist. Her eyes were the color of moss found deep under snow, sharp, intelligent, and unblinking. "You are smaller than the rumors suggest," the woman rasped, setting a wicker basket filled with glass vials onto the table. "And far too pale. Does the king intend to keep a statue or a mate?" Clementine stood from her chair by the roaring hearth, clutching her shawl. I don't know what he intends. I haven't seen him. Typical, the woman grunted. She gestured to a stool. Sit. I am Norabella Ravensmere, healer, seer, and the only soul in this frozen rock who remembers Leopold when he was a boy who scraped his knees. Clementine obeyed, sitting cautiously. You know him well? Shh. I know the bloodline, Norabella corrected, kneeling to inspect Clementine's ankles. Her hands were rough but surprisingly gentle as she applied a salve that smelled of peppermint and camphor to the fading bruises from the shackles. The Thorncrest men are not like other wolves, girl. They are bound to the winter. The cold is not just their element, it is their burden. He feels dangerous, Clementine whispered, the memory of Leopold's vibrating intensity in the carriage making her shiver. Norabella looked up, her mossy eyes softening. He is, but not because of malice. Do you know why the North has no queen? Why the halls are silent? Clementine shook her head. The curse of the permafrost, Norabella murmured, her voice dropping to a storyteller's cadence. As a Thorncrest alpha ages, the beast within grows stronger, colder. It craves the ice. Slowly, it freezes the human heart, emotions dull, warmth becomes painful. Eventually, the man is lost and only the winter wolf remains, a creature of pure instinct and hunger. Clementine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. And he is freezing? He's been freezing for a decade, Norabella said bluntly. He bought you not for labor, Clementine. He sensed something in you, a spark, a heat fierce enough to survive the crushing weight of rejection. He thinks you might be the hearth fire that keeps the winter at bay. I am a rejected Omega, Clementine argued, her voice trembling. My own pack didn't want me. How can I save a king? Norabella stood, wiping her hands on her apron. She gripped Clementine's chin, forcing her to look up. Fire does not need permission to burn, child. It simply is. Tonight begins the winter solstice. The lords of the Reach are gathering. Leopold has commanded you attend. Panic flared in Clementine's chest. I can't. They will see what I am. They will smell the failure on me. Let them smell it, Norabella grinned, revealing teeth that were slightly too sharp. Let them smell that you survived. Tonight, you are not a reject. You are the king's choice. And in the north, the king's word is tougher than iron. The preparations took hours. Servants bathed Clementine in water infused with oils of cedar and amber, scrubbing the scent of the southern kennels from her skin until she smelled like a forest after rain. Norabella dressed her in a gown of shimmering silver silk that fit like a second skin, the sleeves long and sheer, the bodice structured to hold her high. Around her neck, she placed a simple pendant, a jagged shard of raw diamond on a platinum chain. It is the tear of the mountain, Norabella said. It protects the wearer from the cold, not the weather, the other kind. When Clementine stood at the top of the obsidian staircase leading to the great hall, her breath hitched. The room was a cavern of shadows and starlight. The ceiling was enchanted to mirror the night sky, making it feel as though the hundreds of courtiers below were dancing in the void of space. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the heavy musk of powerful alphas. Don't faint, a voice whispered at her elbow. Elijah Stormhaven, the king's beta, stood there offering his arm. He looked dashing in formal military grays, though his eyes scanned the room with the vigilance of a bodyguard. If you faint, they'll think you're weak. If you vomit, they'll think you're pregnant. Let's avoid both, Clementine managed a weak smile. I'll try. They descended. The music, a haunting melodic waltz played on cellos, did not stop, but the conversation did. Heads turned. Eyes, reflecting the candlelight like predators in the dark, tracked her movement. She felt the weight of their judgment, the sneers at her lack of a powerful scent, the curiosity about her price tag. At the base of the stairs, Leopold waited. He was breathtaking. He wore a coat of black velvet with silver embroidery that mimicked frost creeping up the fabric. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the severe, devastating lines of his face. But it was his aura that hit her first, a wave of power so immense it made the air around him shimmer. He didn't smile. He looked at her with a hunger that was terrifying in its intensity. "Leave us, Elijah," Leopold commanded, his voice a low rumble. He extended a hand. Clementine placed hers in it. His skin was fever-hot, a stark contrast to the icy demeanor he projected. "You look," Leopold started, his voice rough, as if he hadn't spoken in days. He cleared his throat. You look like the moon reflected on a frozen lake. And you look like the storm that froze it, Clementine replied, the words slipping out before she could stop them. A flicker of amusement danced in his blue eyes. Touché, dance with me. He pulled her onto the floor. He moved with a predatory grace, leading her through the complex steps as if they had practiced for years. For a few minutes, the staring court disappeared. There was only the heat of his hand on her waist, the scent of pine and ozone clinging to him, and the strange magnetic pull in her chest that made her want to step closer. They hate me, she whispered, looking at a group of noblewomen who were whispering behind their fans. They fear change, Leopold murmured, his lips brushing her ear. And you are the biggest change this citadel has seen in a century. Ignore them. Look at me. She did. And in his eyes, she saw it, the encroaching ice Norabella had spoken of. A dullness around the edges of the iris, a frantic need in the pupil. He was holding on to his humanity by a thread, and that thread was currently wrapped around her. The moment shattered with the arrival of a man who cut through the crowd like a knife. Charming, a voice drawled. Simply charming. Leopold stiffened, his grip on Clementine tightening to the point of pain. Marcus Winterholt stepped into their circle. He was beautiful in a cruel, sharp way, with hair like spun white gold and eyes of pale violet. He wore white, mocking the black of the king, and his smile didn't reach his cold eyes. King Leopold, Marcus bowed, the gesture exaggerated. And the acquisition. I must say, for 1,000,000 gold coins, I expected something with a bit more presence. She smells like fear and milk. Careful, Marcus, Leopold growled. The temperature in the immediate vicinity dropped. Frost began to bloom on the stone floor beneath their feet. I am merely concerned for the treasury, Marcus smirked, stepping closer to Clementine. He sniffed the air near her neck, violating her space. Is this how the great Thorncrest line ends? Not with a queen, but with a pet bought from a discount bin. Clementine shrank back, the old shame of the auction block rushing back. She was nothing. Worthless. Leopold released her, pushing her gently but firmly behind him. When he turned back to Marcus, the human mask cracked, his jaw unhinged slightly, his teeth lengthening into fangs. A growl, subsonic and terrifying, vibrated the wine in the guests' glasses. Speak of her again. Leopold's voice was distorted, two voices layered over one another, and I will paint this hall with your blood. Is that a threat from my king? Marcus raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence, though he took a step back. Or is it the beast talking? It's getting hard to tell the difference these days. Look at you. You're losing control. You're freezing over, Leopold, and everyone here knows it. The truth of the words struck Leopold like a physical blow. He staggered back, clutching his chest. The frost on the floor surged outward, shattering the nearest windows. Snow swirled into the ballroom, extinguishing the candles. The beast was clawing its way out. Leopold! Clementine cried, reaching for him. He whirled on her, his eyes glowing a luminous alien blue. He didn't recognize her. He snarled, a sound of pure, feral aggression. Get back! He roared, the force of his voice knocking her to the ground. Run, before I tear you apart! He looked at his hands, which were turning into claws, the skin cracking as black fur burst through. With a howl of despair that shook the foundations of the citadel, he turned and smashed through the terrace doors, leaping out into the blizzard. The ballroom descended into chaos. Screams erupted as the freezing wind whipped through the broken doors. Nobles fled, trampling one another in their haste to escape the sudden winter that had invaded the sanctuary. Clementine lay on the cold stone, gasping for breath. Elijah was there in an instant, pulling her up. Go to your room, he shouted over the wind. Bar the door. He's out there, Clementine yelled back, staring at the shattered darkness where Leopold had vanished. He's alone. He's dangerous. Elijah shook her. He's in the deep freeze. He won't know you. He won't know anyone. If you go to him, he will kill you. I have to rally the guard. Elijah released her and ran toward the guards, shouting orders. Clementine stood frozen. If you are soft here, you die. That was the law of the North. But she remembered the look in Leopold's eyes before the beast took over. It wasn't rage. It was terror. He was terrified of hurting her. He had run into the void to protect her from himself. She looked at the warm, safe corridor that led to her room. Then she looked at the storm. She grabbed a heavy fur cloak from a discarded pile near the door. She grabbed an iron torch from a sconce, though the wind would likely kill the flame. "I am not soft," she whispered to herself. "I am the one he chose." She ran out onto the terrace. The cold hit her like a hammer. The wind screamed, tearing at her clothes, blinding her with ice crystals. But she could see the trail, deep gouges in the snow where a massive creature had clawed its way up the mountain path toward the peaks. The climb was a nightmare. The air grew thinner, burning her lungs. Her boots slipped on the icy rocks. Twice she fell, scraping her hands raw, but she forced herself up. The diamond pendant around her neck pulsed with a faint warmth, the only thing keeping her blood moving. She found him near the summit, in a cave known as the Throat of the World. It was a hollow in the rock, filled with ancient jagged ice formations. At the back of the cave, huddled in the shadows, was a monster. He was massive, easily the size of a draft horse. His fur was black as the void, matted with ice and blood. His eyes were two burning coals of blue fire. He was pacing, snarling at the shadows, fighting an invisible enemy. Clementine stepped into the entrance. The wind died down here, leaving an eerie silence. "Leopold," she called out, her voice trembling. The beast froze, his head whipped around. A low, rumbling growl started deep in his chest, vibrating through the floor and into her boots. He bared teeth the length of daggers. Prey. The intent was clear in his posture. He crouched, muscles coiling to spring. Clementine didn't run. She knew that if she ran, her instinct to flee would trigger his instinct to chase. She dropped the torch. She unclasped the heavy cloak and let it fall to the snowy floor, standing before him in just her torn silver gown. "I'm not afraid of you," she lied, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You bought me. You saved me. I am yours." The wolf took a step forward, sniffing the air. The scent of her fear was there, yes, but underneath it was something else. The scent of the soap from his castle, the scent of the gown he had given her, and the scent of hope. He lunged. Clementine squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the tear of teeth, but the blow never came. Hot breath washed over her face. She opened her eyes. The massive muzzle was inches from her nose. The blue eyes were manic, shifting between beast and man. He was trembling violently, his body fighting the ice that sought to encase him. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, Clementine reached out. She took her bare hand and pressed it against the coarse fur of his cheek. "Come back," she whispered. "It's warm here." The contact sparked. A visible ripple of golden light pulsed from her hand into the wolf. The beast whined, a high, broken sound that broke her heart. He leaned into her touch, his massive weight forcing her to her knees. He collapsed around her, a mountain of fur and heat, burying his great head in her lap. Clementine wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his ruff. The ice on his fur began to melt, soaking her dress. "I've got you," she sobbed into the darkness. "I've got you." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cave, the winter began to recede, pushed back by the stubborn, defiant beat of two hearts sinking in the dark. Morning did not break in the throat of the world. It bled in. A pale, bruised violet light filtered through the thick curtain of icicles blocking the cave entrance, casting long, fractured shadows across the stone floor. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving the world outside muffled in a white, suffocating silence. Inside, however, the air was not cold. It was thick with a heavy, musk-scented warmth. Clementine woke slowly, her consciousness drifting up from the deepest sleep she had ever known. She wasn't lying on the hard stone anymore. She was curled against a surface that was solid, unyielding, and radiating a furnace-like heat. A chest, broad and scarred, rose and fell beneath her cheek with a slow, tectonic rhythm. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The giant wolf was gone. In his place lay Leopold. He was human, unclothed and sprawled amidst the pile of furs, his arm thrown protectively over her waist, his face buried in the crook of her neck. For a long time, Clementine didn't move. She hardly dared to breathe. In the harsh daylight, stripped of his royal finery and his terrifying beast form, the King of the North looked shockingly vulnerable. The severe lines of his face were smoothed by sleep, and his eyelashes cast long, dark shadows on high cheekbones. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who had been fighting a war alone for too long. He stirred. A low rumble started in his chest, and his muscles tensed instinctively, the reaction of a predator waking in unfamiliar territory. Then, his scent shifted. The sharp metallic tang of aggression faded, replaced by something richer, deeper, pine sap and wood smoke. He pulled back slightly, his ice-blue eyes opening to meet hers. There was no alpha command in them now, only a raw, guarded uncertainty. He looked at her, then at his own hands, turning them over slowly as if checking for claws. "You stayed," he rasped. His voice was ruined, rougher than gravel, as if he had spent the night screaming. "You didn't give me much choice," Clementine whispered, brushing a strand of dark, sweat-dampened hair from his forehead. "You're very heavy." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, brittle and fleeting. He sat up, the furs pooling around his waist, exposing the intricate tapestry of scars that mapped his torso. Claw marks, blade slices, the history of a violent life. He rubbed his face with a trembling hand. "I could have killed you, Clementine," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The ice, it takes my mind. It makes me forget everything but the hunger for silence. When the change takes me like that, I am not a man. I'm just winter." "But you didn't kill me," she said firmly, sitting up beside him and clutching the heavy cloak to her chest to ward off the cave's chill. "You remembered me." Leopold turned to her, his gaze intense and searching. "I remembered the fire. In the dark, you felt like a hearth in a ruined house. Warm, constant." He reached out, his fingers hovering inches from her face, trembling slightly. "Do you understand what you have done? The curse of the Thorncrest line is not just shifting. It is that we become the environment. We freeze from the inside out. Eventually, the heart stops beating and turns to stone. I was sure I was lost last night." "Is that why you bought me?" she asked softly, needing to know. "To be a heater? A talisman against the cold?" "No," he said, his gaze dropping to her lips. The hunger returned to his eyes, but it wasn't the hunger of the beast. It was the hunger of a drowning man for air. "I bought you because when I walked into that auction, you were the only thing in the room that felt real. Everyone else was a mask, a calculation. You were pain and fear and defiance. You were life, and I was starving for it." He closed the distance between them. It wasn't a demanding kiss, it was a desperate, worshipful claiming. His lips were cool, but his mouth was hot, searing against hers. Clementine made a soft sound in her throat, dropping the cloak to wrap her arms around his bare shoulders. Skin to skin, a shockwave passed through them. It wasn't just physical, it was metaphysical. She felt a snap in the center of her chest, like a golden thread pulling tight, anchoring her soul to his. It wasn't the forced, biting bond of a traditional claiming. It was the chosen bond of two broken pieces finding their exact match. Leopold pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. His breathing was ragged. "My Omega," he breathed, the words vibrating against her skin like a prayer. "My anchor." Clementine felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a partner. "My king," she replied, her voice steady. "The storm is over, Leopold. Now, let's go home. I believe you have a court to silence." The descent from the throat of the world was treacherous. The path was slick with fresh ice and the wind still bit with needle-sharp teeth. Leopold insisted on carrying her through the deepest drifts, his strength returning with unnatural speed as they moved closer to the citadel. But as the black spires of the fortress came into view, piercing the gray sky like jagged fingers, the sense of peace they had found in the cave evaporated. Smoke, black, oily and smelling of burning tar, was rising from the main courtyard. Leopold set her down, his face hardening instantly into the mask of the king. The vulnerability of the morning was gone, locked away behind a wall of granite. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice dropping into the alpha command that made her knees instinctively weak. "Do not speak unless I tell you to." They entered through the postern gate, a hidden entrance known only to the royal guard. The stone corridors were eerily empty, the torches gutted and smoking. The silence here was different. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the silence of a held breath before a scream. They found Elijah Stormhaven in the war room. The map table was overturned. Elijah sat on a crate, nursing a nasty gash on his forehead, while 3 loyal guards bandaged their own wounds. Elijah jumped up when they entered, relief washing over his battered face so intensely he nearly collapsed. "Leo, thank the moon. We thought the storm took you, or the beast." "What happened?" Leopold demanded, striding to the center of the room. He radiated a cold, lethal calm. Marcus! Elijah spat the name like poison. He didn't leave. He rallied the traditionalists, the old families who think you're too soft, too modern, and too cursed. After you left the Great Hall, he told them the madness had finally taken you. He claimed you abandoned the pack. He claimed the throne? Leopold asked, his voice deceptively soft. He claimed the throne by right of stability, Elijah confirmed. He's holding the main courtyard. He has the numbers, Leo. He's demanding you abdicate or face the right of the Frozen Fang. Clementine stepped forward from the shadows. What is that? Elijah looked at her, surprised by her presence, then at Leopold. A duel, Leopold answered grimly, not looking away from his beta. To the death. No magic, no shifting. Just steel and snow. The old way. You can't, Clementine said, gripping his arm. The muscle beneath the sleeve was rock hard. You're exhausted. The change took everything out of you. You haven't eaten in 2 days. If I don't, I lose the North, Leopold said, turning to her. And if I lose the North, I lose you. Marcus will not let you live, Clementine. To him, you are a symbol of my weakness. He placed his hands on her shoulders. His eyes were clear, burning with a resolve that terrified her. Marcus wants a beast? I will show him a king. He turned back to Elijah. Sound the horns. Tell Winterholt I accept. The horns of the citadel blew, a deep, mournful sound that echoed off the mountains and vibrated in Clementine's bones. It was the sound of war. 10 minutes later, Leopold walked out into the main courtyard. The snow had been trampled into gray slush by hundreds of boots. The entire court was there, soldiers, nobles, servants, forming a massive ring. Marcus stood in the center, stripped to the waist despite the freezing temperature. He twirled 2 curved daggers, the steel glinting in the flat light. He looked fast, lethal, and entirely too confident. Beaker. Welcome back, Majesty, Marcus sneered, his voice projecting effortlessly to the crowd. Did you enjoy your run in the woods? Did your pet keep you warm? Leopold stripped off his heavy coat and his shirt, handing them to Elijah. His torso was a map of scars, testifying to a life of war, but compared to Marcus's smooth, unblemished skin, he looked battered. The crowd murmured at the sight of the fresh claw marks on his chest, self-inflicted during his transformation. He drew his long sword. The steel sang a high, clear note as it left the scabbard. Enough talk, Marcus, Leopold said quietly. Let us see if your blood is as blue as your ego. The fight was brutal, fast, and ugly. Marcus moved like a viper, darting in and out, his daggers seeking the gaps in Leopold's defense. He was fresh, rested, and fueled by arrogance. Leopold fought with the economy of a glacier, slow, heavy blows that carried enough force to shatter bone. But he was slowing down. The cold of the curse was still lingering in his limbs, making his movements sluggish. Marcus slashed Leopold's arm. Bright red blood sprayed onto the white snow. The traditionalists cheered. Leopold grunted, swinging his sword in a massive arc. Marcus ducked, laughing, and drove a dagger into Leopold's ribs. Clementine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She felt the pain as if it were her own, a sharp, searing line of fire across her side. The bond was wide open. Is this your king? Marcus shouted to the crowd, dancing back out of range. Look at him! He bleeds like a stuck pig. He's broken! Leopold staggered. His breath was coming in ragged gasps of white mist. He looked at Marcus, his eyes glazing over. The ice was creeping back. Not the beast this time, but the paralysis. His heart was slowing. Marcus saw it. He grinned, feinting low and then spinning, driving his boot into Leopold's wounded knee. The king went down. A collective gasp went through the courtyard. Marcus was on him instantly, a knee on Leopold's chest, a dagger at his throat. Yield! Marcus screamed, his face twisted in triumph. Yield and I will let you live in the dungeon. I will even let you keep your little whore. Leopold growled, struggling to throw the younger Alpha off, but his strength was failing. The ice was locking his joints. He looked up, his eyes meeting Clementine's across the circle of boots. There was no fear in them, only an apology. I failed. Clementine felt his despair wash over her through the bond. It was a cold, suffocating tide. No, she didn't think. She didn't plan. She simply acted. She wrenched her arm free from Elijah's grip. She stepped past the line of guards. She didn't run to them. She stood her ground, chin high, and drew breath into lungs that had survived auction blocks in freezing mountains. Enough! The sound that tore from her throat was not human. It was the primal, resonant command of an omega claiming her pack. It wasn't a request. It was a law of nature. It carried the weight of the earth, the depth of the roots, the heat of the core. It hit the courtyard like a physical shockwave. Every wolf in the vicinity, traditionalist and loyalist alike, whined and dropped to their bellies, their instincts overwhelmed by the sheer authority of the command. Even Marcus flinched. His concentration broke. For a fraction of a second, the blade at Leopold's throat wavered. He looked up, bewildered, staring at the small woman who burned like a star in the gray day. That split second was all Leopold needed. He didn't just roar, he exploded. The ice in his veins shattered. He bucked his hips with the force of a tectonic plate, throwing Marcus off. He scrambled up, ignoring the blood pouring from his side, ignoring the ruined knee. He swung his sword. Marcus tried to parry, but he was too slow, still reeling from the Omega's voice. The flat of Leopold's blade struck the side of his head with a sickening crack. Marcus spun and hit the snow face first. He didn't move. Leopold stood over him, chest heaving, blood streaming down his pale skin. He raised his sword, point down, hovering over Marcus's heart. The crowd held its breath. The silence was absolute. Then Leopold looked at Clementine. She stood tall in the snow, her silver dress torn, her hair wild. She wasn't looking at a monster. She was looking at her partner. She gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. "We are not him." Leopold froze. The red haze of battle cleared from his eyes. He lowered the sword slowly. "He lives," Leopold announced, his voice carrying to the back of the courtyard. "Throw him in the cells. Let him watch. Let him see what a true reign looks like." He dropped the sword. It clattered on the stone. He turned and limped toward Clementine. The crowd parted, bowing low, not out of fear this time, but out of a terrified awe. They had seen the king bleed, but they had heard the Omega speak. Leopold collapsed into her arms, his weight nearly taking them both down. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply. "You," he wheezed, his legs giving out as the adrenaline crashed. "You commanded the pack." "I commanded my wolf," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands to his bleeding wounds, desperate to staunch the flow. And he listened. Leopold smiled, weak but genuine. "Then I suppose I must obey." 6 months later, the wind on the ramparts was still cold. It was the north, after all, but it no longer carried the scent of death. It smelled of wet earth, melting ice, and the sharp, clean fragrance of pine sap. Clementine stood on the balcony of the royal suite, leaning against the stone railing. She wore a dress of deep midnight blue velvet, heavy and warm, but her feet were bare against the sun-warmed stone. Thinking, Leopold wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. He was warm. The unnatural, freezing chill that had plagued him for decades was gone, replaced by the steady, healthy heat of a shifter in his prime. He still carried the scars of the duel, silver lines against his tan skin, but he moved without pain. "I was looking for it," she said, leaning back into him, soaking in his solidity. "For what?" "The first flower. Norabella said it would bloom this week." Leopold chuckled, the sound vibrating against her back. "Norabella says many things. Most of them are riddles designed to annoy me. She said that when the king found his heart, the land would remember how to breathe," Clementine quoted softly. "She gives me too much credit," Leopold murmured, turning her around in his arms. He looked down at her, his eyes clear and full of a quiet, abiding devotion. "The land didn't heal because of me, Clementine. It healed because you brought the sun with you. You thawed the stone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it with a flick of his thumb. Inside sat a ring, not of gold or gaudy diamonds, but a band of polished obsidian, inlaid with a vein of raw, unrefined gold that wound through the black stone like a river of light. "It is not a crown," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I know you hate those, but it is a promise. Will you rule this frozen rock with me? Will you be the queen who broke the winter?" Clementine looked at the ring, then up at the man who had once terrified her, the man who had bought her to save himself and ended up saving her in return. She saw the journey in his eyes, from the auction block to the carriage, from the ice cave to the bloodied snow of the courtyard. "Yes," she whispered, "but only if you promise one thing." Anything. Keep the fireplace lit. Leopold grinned, a true, devastatingly handsome smile that made her knees weak and her heart sore. For you, my love, I will burn down the world. He slipped the ring onto her finger. As he kissed her, below them, in the shadow of the citadel wall, a single purple crocus pushed its way through the thinning snow, opening its petals to the sun. Clementine and Leopold's story wasn't just about survival. It was about the transformative power of acceptance. In a world that valued them only for their utility, her for her labor, him for his power, they found a sanctuary in each other. The rejected Omega became the anchor of a kingdom, and the monster of the north became a man capable of mercy. Their love didn't just break a curse, it redefined strength, proving that even in the harshest winter, spring is inevitable if you have the courage to wait for it. Did you love this journey to the frozen north? If Clementine and Leopold melted your heart, please like this story and share it with your fellow romance lovers. Don't forget to subscribe for more epic tales of fated mates, dangerous alphas, and love that conquers all. Whatever you do, don't let the fire go out.